and then you can make a choice to avoid that area. Maybe make a choice to go check it out. Forwardobserver.com. That's one of the things we track. And listen, we started doing this back in 2016, but we really gained a lot of notoriety doing this in 2020 because we were tracking the riots every night and producing a roll-up every morning. Hey, here's what happened. Here's the cities involved. This is what we think we're seeing. These are the groups involved, et cetera, et cetera. We are going to get back to probably something like 2020. Not necessarily BLM riots, but there is going to be something like a 2020 happen again. And with that, let's go ahead and talk about why that is the case. And it has to do with this group called Indivisible, which is, I think, probably the country's largest protest organizing group. This was started back in 2016 during the first Trump administration. They started this as a direct response to the Trump administration to build a vehicle for what we are probably going to see in 2028. There are many reasons why I said last year, I mean, literally a year ago, why 2025 would not be a repeat of 2020. And the biggest, I mean, really, the number one reason is because the left and the activist left, militant, radical, revolutionary left, whatever you want to call them, they're still in a rebuilding phase. They are still trying to rebuild these networks like synapses in the brain. They're still trying to build local groups, networked with state and regional groups, networked back into the national movement. And what we're pretty clearly still in the organizing phase. So with that as context, remember 2020 didn't just happen, just didn't spring up over a couple of weeks. 2020 was the culmination of 4 or 5 years worth of agitation, networking, organization, and training. We don't have 4 to 5 years of networking and agitation and organizing and training. We got about 6 or so months of it. And so this is going to take years to build up again. In all likelihood, probably years. And I'll state that case here right now. So Indivisible published a series of training videos, and they call themselves Freedom Trainers. But in these training videos, they did confirm my expectations of broadly 3 phases of their strategic non-cooperation campaign. And that's what they call it, strategic non-cooperation. You should familiarize yourself with that term if you don't already know. Non-cooperation is a tactic that was developed by Gene Sharp, and other people I'm sure had some involvement there. But Gene Sharp is often cited as the godfather of color revolutions and other anti-authoritarian movements. Now, I'm going to say a lot of things about authoritarian regimes. I don't think the Trump administration is an authoritarian regime, certainly no more than, say, Biden was. But when I use that term, I just use that using their frame of reference so you can understand where they're coming from. And this theory of non-cooperation goes that autocratic regimes require the participation of its citizens to keep a country functioning. And when a mass of those citizens cease cooperation with the regime, society ceases to function, and the pillars of that autocratic regime are weakened, and that eventually causes the collapse of the regime. And you can see these pillars of support here on the page. So the strategy includes building a mass defiance movement. Let's break that down. Mass defiance movement. Mass means a lot of people, the mass of the people. Defiance means not just voting, but active forms of opposition against a regime. Active non-cooperation, civil disobedience, direct action demonstrations, something more than just protesting on the sidelines, although that is also important to the movement. So that would be a mass defiance movement, and we'll break this down a little bit more. But this is all aimed at weakening the 6 pillars of a society that supports a regime. And those are business, labor, faith, education, civil service, and military or police. This is a screenshot of one of the slides in those training videos. So under this strategy, you would have business owners and CEOs and other people openly opposing an autocratic regime. They could do things like encourage their employees to do the same, put up signs or posters, use their profits to fund protest or fund non-cooperation or direct action demonstrations against a regime. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar here is labor. So this is going to be stuff like worker strikes and slowdowns. Another reason why 2028 is probably going to be the year when this pops off is we're seeing this huge push by these labor unions over the past several years to negotiate their contract expiration dates. So this is they have these contracts between these labor unions and the employers or the corporation, and those contracts have to be renewed every so often. Well, Shawn Fain, the director of United Auto Workers, has encouraged all these trade unions or labor unions to go and renegotiate their contracts for renewal on May 1st, 2028. What is that? International Workers' Day or May Day. And so that is just another reason when you have all these labor unions, they're going to push for a general strike in 2028. I don't know if they're going to make it or not, but they're going to push like hell to have a general strike, like a nationwide general strike. I'm not telling you it's going to be successful. I'm telling you they're going to try it. It is 100% plain as day. That is what they're going for. That's why it is another reason why 2028 is probably going to be just as disruptive as 2020. So you got 3 years to get your stuff together, basically. All right, so that's the second pillar. There's labor. The third is faith. So encourage faith leaders to, or have faith leaders encourage their congregations to oppose the government, to include that in their messages, to hold meetings, hold education, training, whatever. Number 4 is education. So have teachers take these opportunities to educate in their classrooms, use anti-authoritarian curriculum in the classrooms. Number 5 is civil service. So have government employees work from the inside to grind down a regime. So that could be things like losing paperwork or kind of work slowdowns, not doing what you're supposed to, leaking certain information is given as an example. And finally, the 6th pillar here is military and police. So they are going to be encouraged to not enforce a regime's dictates or either that or defect altogether. And so this is the kind of the mass defiance strategy here. And when you have enough people engaging in non-cooperation or mass defiance, a regime no longer has the internal support required to survive. And I just want to share with you just briefly this quote. And this quote is directly here from Gene Sharp. It's a pretty good summation of this whole theory. And Gene Sharp says, let's see here. All right, here's what he says, quote, "By themselves, rulers cannot collect taxes, enforce repressive laws and regulations, keep trains running on time, prepare national budgets, direct traffic, manage ports, print money, repair roads, keep markets supplied with food, make steel, build rockets, train the police and army, issue postage stamps, or even milk a cow. People provide these services." And he continues, "If people would stop providing these skills, the ruler could not rule." And I think that's a pretty fair summation of this whole strategy, which is weakening a country or weakening the pillars that support a government from the inside. One of the things that, more broadly, even last October, before Trump was even elected, I told you exactly what the strategy would be. Undermine the legitimacy, the authority, and the capacity of the Trump administration. Weakening the legitimacy by characterizing Trump as an illegitimate president. I think that's a really high bar because of how Trump won. So the next thing you have to do is start saying, well, Trump is doing illegitimate things, which is exactly a part of their strategic messaging. You reduce the authority by getting people to not follow these laws. So immigration, non-cooperation with immigration enforcement, not following some of the dictate or the executive orders, some of the things that Trump wants to be done. You sap the authority. And when a president or an administration or some autocratic regime, when the citizens no longer follow those laws, that regime loses authority. And then finally, the capacity. A government, a president, whoever, You've got to have the manpower, you got to have the resources and the funding and the things. You need things and you need people to enforce those laws. And if this movement can undermine the capacity along with undermining authority, then you're naturally going to delegitimize a government. And at the point where you have an illegitimate government, the next logical conclusion is, well, it has to be replaced with a legitimate government or a legitimate president. And that's exactly what they're going for. So with that, let's talk about what this phased strategy actually is. So indivisible 50-51, which is the 50 states, 50 protests one day. That's one of the main kind of protest organizers. And then there are other national protest organizations as well. They often cite what they call the 3.5% rule. And I've talked about this before, but just to refresh your memory, the 3.5% rule says that a regime will eventually lose power when just 3.5% of a country engages in non-cooperation. And they take that from this study. There's 35 cases between the years 1991 and 2021. And researchers found that regardless of the size, if a country had a civil resistance movement, they could defeat autocratic regimes about half the time, about 51.7% of the time. So just above 500 batting average there. But they would have far more success when those movements reached the gold standard of 3.5% of a population. So that is the gold standard. That's what they're shooting for. In today's America, that would be about 12 million Americans or 12 million residents. So far, the largest turnout that they have had for a National Day of Action is about 3 million. I've heard some of them claim that they hit 5 million. I don't believe that, but 3 million, I do think they hit that. So 3 out of 12, just do some math here. Last week, I mentioned also that this strategy, this strategic non-cooperation strategy, was chosen for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's relatively low risk compared to armed conflict. I don't know why. Many people have talked about, the left is going to rise up and there's going to be these armed leftists. And listen, I know that's history, but that's not what these people are doing. I know that's the reality in a lot of places, but that is not, at least so far, that's not today's left. So we're talking about predominantly nonviolent tactics. You look at an insurgency. The average length of an insurgency is 10 years. Nobody on the left wants to do this for 10 years, especially considering the high casualty toll. And also, there's no guarantee of success. But these color revolutions have far higher likelihood of success. And remember, color revolutions, once they're actually launched, once you actually get to the execution part, they last weeks to months. We're not talking about multi-year high death toll conflicts. The left does not want that whatsoever. And I know there are armed leftists. Believe me, I know there are. But that is not what they want. That is not a war they're going to win. So I don't know why so many people just keep thinking about, there's going to be this mass armed revolt and there's going to be like an 1861 style civil war with these people or something. That's nuts. They do not want to fight an armed conflict over this. They don't have the cards, as we all know. At any rate, strategic non-cooperation, civil disobedience, far lower risk than something armed. That means that it's going to have mass appeal. A leftist armed revolution does not have a lot of mass appeal on the left, let me tell you. Because, you watch these videos, and I've talked about this before. I see all these videos, these leftists say, the only way to stop fascism, you got to go out and kill the fascists, kill all the fascists. And it's like this 20-something blonde-haired girl who's never seen a gun in her entire life. It is always other people who are going to do the violence when these people talk about violence. They don't have the people to do it. So that does not have a lot of mass appeal on the left. What does have more mass appeal, it's going to get a lot more mainstream involvement, which is what they want, because mass is the key feature here. That 12 million Americans, roughly. What is going to have much more mass appeal is something that is predominantly nonviolent, which is not to say there will be no violence. There obviously will be, and there has been, there will continue to be. One other thing about this is there is a runway to escalation. There's an escalation ladder here. One thing we have seen from the left is they'll try something and they will explain their demands. And if their demands aren't met, they will escalate. And they will restate their demands. And if their demands are not met, they will try to escalate again. And so there is runway for escalation in the strategy, because you start with a mass protest movement, and then you move to a mass defiance movement or a mass resistance movement. And then if that doesn't work, you move to potentially a mass revolutionary movement. This is far less risky than any strategy of armed political violence. Again, that's not to say that there will be no armed political violence. That is just not going to be a main effort of their strategy. That's not a conflict that they're going to win, not an armed conflict, not in this country. So they use nonviolent action. One reason is because it's far harder to combat. If someone's shooting at you, you just shoot back. If someone doesn't go to work, or if someone, because they're striking, what are you going to do? Force them to go to work at gunpoint? If someone's slowing down on the job and they're not doing, yeah, maybe they get fired, but it's very difficult to directly combat that. We're talking about asymmetric use of power here. Everyone understands a gunfight. Everyone understands that kind of power. This kind of power is far harder to combat. So the mass appeal potential here, this is really key. It has mass appeal. It is going to get the largest number of people involved. The mass appeal potential of nonviolent strategic non-cooperation is exponentially higher than any form of armed political violence, which means that more citizens can engage. And that is the strongest feature of this strategic non-cooperation, a mass movement that cannot be directly confronted. How do you fight a protest? How do you fight civil disobedience other than going in and trying to arrest so many people? And then you end up getting in a fight over that, and then it's on video, and then we get back into this 2020 thing. It's like, oh, look, these cops are firing tear gas and pepper spray at these innocent, peaceful protesters. This is what dictators do. And that radicalizes other people, especially in the middle. This is their strategy, or this is the theory at least. And then that brings more people off the sidelines. There's a reason why for actually many years now, the future does not belong to the man with the most guns. The future of this country belongs to the people who can belongs to the man who can bring the most people to the fight. Let me restate that so we can get a clip out of this. The future of this country does not belong to the man with the most guns. It belongs to the man who can bring the most amount of people to the fight. There's a reason why these movements are talking about building political, social, and economic power. There's a reason why they're talking about using that power to undermine the Trump administrations, or the right, or the conservatives, or Republicans, or the MAGA movements, political, social, and economic power. This is where the battlefield is. There's so many people. I see this all the time on social media. Oh, I bought this brand new AR-15 and it's got a twist rate on this barrel, and we got these kind of bullets, and oh, here's my kit that I ordered that's, and it's just insane amounts of money and effort going into something that in all likelihood will never be used. When these people fail to engage on the political, social, and economic level, they cede that battlefield. They cede that battle space to the left, because that is exactly where the battle is. I digress. Let's go ahead and talk about these levels here. So Indivisible's latest training videos confirmed my previous expectations that we are seeing a phased strategy play out. And as these freedom, quote unquote, freedom trainers outline, the strategy starts with a protest movement, which has been sustained. So that is the base of the movement. That is the foundation of this pyramid. They cannot move forward without a sustained mass protest movement, which they have achieved. Now having at least 2 national days of protest meet probably the 3 million mark, 3 million participants. So the next phase is to develop individual organizers and the cadres required to start training up citizens or residents at the individual and small group level so they can engage in non-cooperation in a local area, such as a town or maybe a county. The next phase of that is when you have a base of individual and small group action, you move to larger groups engaging in collective non-cooperation across an area like a state or a region. And then finally, you build that into a mass non-cooperation movement at the national level. So this roughly mirrors the Popular Revolution pyramid that I published earlier this year. We'll get back to this in this other slide in just a sec. And this starts with symbolic resistance at the bottom. So these are the toothless protests that we've seen for roughly 6 months now, but they have been sustained. And then you move up the one layer of escalation. You move to selective resistance. So this is the strategic use of civil disobedience. I think they are trying to break into that level of escalation. And then followed by mass resistance at the national level. So you get these big national days and weeks of action. And then you ultimately end in an attempted popular revolution, which if they do kick this thing off, it could happen prematurely, but it's probably going to be 2028. If we kind of stay on this trajectory, we're probably looking at 2028. We're probably not looking at any time sooner. Although the one caveat is if Trump does something so egregious, or the administration does something so egregious, or something that is perceived as so egregious, then I think we could probably see this kick off sooner. One thing that Robert and I are particularly paying attention to is this redistricting process that's ongoing in Texas, because this has the high potential to carry some political instability, and it's something that we're on the front edge of this. We'll continue to watch it. So to reiterate previous assessments here, I think we're probably in about the third inning of a 9-inning baseball game, which is to say we're still predominantly in the organizing phase. These networks, the human infrastructure, the communications, the funding, all that stuff is still being organized. It is still in the organizing phase. This is the first phase. Although we have seen some sporadic and sometimes even lethal political violence, I think those are outliers. I don't think that actually reflects the current stage. That's definitely not the main effort. The main effort is still training and education, and those are just classic early stage activities. So that's where we are. That's been our bread and butter here at Forward Observer since 2016, when I started Forward Observer as an intelligence company to track what these far left groups were doing back in 2016. And then we did that through 17 all the way through 2020 and 2021 through the worst of it. We are going to repeat that. So if you want to stay ahead of the curve, join us. Come join our mission. Get access to all the intelligence behind the paywall. Understand what's really going on, stuff that you're not going to see on Twitter. You're not going to see in the mainstream media. And let me just say this also. Not only will we keep you ahead of the curve on these big things by talking about them sometimes years in advance, but definitely weeks and months in advance. You're not going to see hair on fire, crazy predictions, end of the world predictions. No one here makes these unfounded conclusions, and we're extremely tight with what we say and how we say it, and we always have evidence to back up our conclusions. So forwardobserver.com. Do join us. All right, and with that, speaking of redistricting, Robert, welcome back. Let's go ahead and jump into this. So Texas